You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to The Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway, and as always on a Sunday I like to bring you something a little different point of view. Tonight is no different to that. Now, terms like the divine feminine, the goddess within, now these are terms that are spoken about but rarely, if ever, lived and embraced. And very, very rarely do we come across somebody that actually embodies that and teaches that. Well, tonight on the Spirit Dimension, I have an absolutely amazing lady. Now, very rarely do you come across an individual like this lady. She has broken with the traditional rules of society. She lives her own truth, teaches this truth to others, and her spirituality is just phenomenal. I'm absolutely blown away, to be fair, to have this amazing lady on the show tonight. Her name is Shakti Sundari. Oh, for God's sakes, what is your name? Shakti Sundari. I mucked that right up at the end. Good evening. I do apologise.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, I do apologise. I was down. I had it all down and then I mucked it up at the last.
I was really with you there. I was so excited by that introduction.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I do apologise. Oh my goodness me. Anyway, now I've got myself all flustered. Please introduce yourself and tell us about you at this point in time. Where are you set right at this moment in time?
Oh gosh, wow. So hello everyone, and I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me, Kerry. I am a priestess. I'm a priestess of love and sacred sexuality, and I know that probably sounds a bit airy-fairy to some people, but I can explain what that means in a minute if you want to know. And I also teach Kundalini Yoga and ecstatic dance, and a particular form of dance just for women called Dancing the Goddess. And I also teach embodied awareness and Tantra, and all of those kind of fit together. For me, that is my life's path. It is my life's passion. Sharing and teaching embodied awareness, the rise of the awakening feminine, and how we can all sort of merge our awakening feminine with the masculine within to become whole. So that's what drives me. I'm really passionate about that. I work specifically with women. And what else? Where am I in my life? I'm a mum. I'm 54, but I feel more like 24. Yeah.
Okay.
A bit about me. Mm-hmm.
So that's where you are right now, but you haven't always been with this mindset, have you? This has been a long journey for you to get to this point. So I want to take you back. I want to take you right back. So. What made you want to start embracing this way of life?
Okay. Gosh, and I could go back, but because there are points that are connected. There's a point that I can remember in my life where I feel like this all started, and that was when I moved to the States with my second husband. So been married once already, second husband, and I couldn't work because I didn't have a visa yet. And I took up this dance practice, which is called the Nia technique. It was a conscious, expressive dance practice, and I loved it. And that conscious dance practice put me in touch with my body and my energy and my power in a way that I hadn't been before. And I knew I had to teach it. I just knew the minute I did my first class, I had to teach this practice. And funnily enough, when I took my teacher training, I was 6 weeks pregnant. And there was something about being pregnant, doing the teacher training, and an opening that happened for me where I was laying on the floor at the end of a class, feeling orgasmic in my whole body, and turning to my friend and saying, wow, this is better than sex. And, and something had woken up in me, and I can kind of backtrack from there to say that, oh gosh, I had been a very late developer sexually, because I was a born-again Christian in my teenage years. So I had actually been embodying this massive split between my sexuality and my spirituality. So I've been very spiritual, but also actually very sexual. But I couldn't own my sexuality as a teenager because the church had taught me it was wrong, But then when I kind of started to have sex quite late in my 20s, it got off to quite a slow start, I have to say. But when it finally got going, I was really into the sex bit, but I didn't really have any understanding of the spiritual aspect of it at all, nor of how to relate. And then when that sort of in that dance teacher experience that I had, that was the beginning for me of my awakening. And it all kind of began to kick off from there in terms of learning then in the dance practice about being really finely aware of what was happening in my body at any one time, because that was part of what I had to teach. And learning about chakras, which I'd never heard, for example. So I began to learn about the energy body, learning about emotional expression, and all of the skills I learned in practice.
Sorry, I would just like to interrupt. My kids haven't come home yet. They're just due home, which is why my dog's going crazy. So poor Shakti's trying to keep going, and I'm like trying to shut my dog up at the same time. But I want to go back to the dance factor. When you first experienced that for yourself, you said it awoken something in you.
Yeah, it was a sense, because, even though I'd been conventionally successful, right? So prior to that, I'd worked in business, I'd worked in the corporate sector, I'd had my own business, I'd worked in academia. So I'd been nominally successful in inverted commas, right? But actually, I wasn't really in my power, and I wasn't fully connected to who I was as a woman. And so there was something about that dance practice that, for the very first time, I began to actually connect with me. And so there was this whole part of me that had been buried and suppressed, basically all through my 20s and early 30s, that I had not been aware of. And it began to surface, and I began to reconnect with me. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes total sense, because, like you said, you feel disconnected. Various things in society or belief systems that are put in from a young age disconnect you. So when you finally have a connection, it clicks. It just, something within you resonates, doesn't it? And it's like, I've got to do this. This is not now something that is just a fancy or a hobby, or I don't know, you know where I'm going with that. It's a calling. It was a calling, isn't it?
Totally. It was like the minute I was in that class, more or less, and the music started, and we started to do these unfamiliar movements, and it was like a combination of martial arts. So we were like doing martial arts movements, very sort of powerful embodiment and sounding with funky, jazzy, free-form stuff. And I was just so ecstatic, which is another thing that is really important to what I do. Mm-hmm. I was in ecstasy. I was in joy. It was about being joyful. And also it wasn't about following the leader although there were sort of choreographed moves to what we were doing. It was very much about take this move and make it yours in your body. So for the very first time, I was learning not to follow somebody, but to find my way of doing something and how it felt right in my body. And that was the key part to this. And so then when I went on to teach it, I realized that everyone has been conditioned to follow and not to feel. Mm. So I was teaching roomfuls of mainly women, and I sort of realised that we've all been conditioned in society to just do what we're told, to follow like a robot, but we're not feeling. People are not feeling what's happening in their own bodies. And so that was a really big part of what that taught me, and what I then went on to be so passionate about teaching others, which is, no, don't just follow what I'm doing, feel it in your own body. Can you feel it? Because most people are very numb. They're not actually sensorially aware of what's happening. Mm-hmm. And if we can't feel what's happening, then we are cut off from as women, we are cut off. But as human beings, not just women, but because I teach women, I speak to that. If we're not feeling our bodies, we're not connected to our wisdom, we're not connected to our power, we're not connected to our sensuality, and we're not connected to our truth. And what I see happening so much everywhere is men and women engaging in intimacy and in relating and in sexuality, but actually they're not feeling themselves. And so it's kind of a fake intimacy.
It so is. Now, we're still talking about the disconnection within. Now, we talk about four areas, don't we? The physical, the spiritual, the emotional, and the mental. And is this about bringing all of those four components together into one and embracing it as a whole, rather than thinking, I've got to look at this I've got to reject the emotion and deal with it as a mental thought pattern, or my physical body is breaking down, so it's just a physical issue, rather than linking it to the other three. Is this what this is? It's bringing it all together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, that was another thing that the NEAR technique training taught me. I mean, that was the first thing I trained in. I've since trained in loads of other stuff. Yeah. Sort of to add onto that, but but that was my foundation. And yes, it underpins everything, which is that it's a holistic view of being, and everything is connected. Nothing is separate. And again, the conditioning is still so strong in the mainstream world to separate off body and mind, emotions and spirit, to separate them all off. But they're all one. They're all connected. And
No, I totally agree. And it is like, although we separate it, even in spirituality, we kind of separate it out, but they are as a whole. It's a funny kind of thing, isn't it? It's like trying to get everyone to go, one thing can affect all four areas, but those four areas aren't individuals, they work as a whole. So you have to, although it might be a physical issue, you've got to look at the whole spectrum. It's not just the one thing, you've got to bring it all together.
Absolutely. And again, as a sort of teacher of feminine wisdom, the body wisdom and the emotional wisdom and intelligence has been so discounted for so many years. And also the fact that the body and sensuality and sexuality are key to spirituality has also been disregarded and overlooked and mistaken. So, I'm really passionate about reminding everybody that the body is sensual and wise and spiritual, and that sexuality is part of our spirituality. They are not separate, because that's like one of the biggest lies that we've been sold. And as long as we continue to believe that lie, we are disconnected from our power and our truth. It's so important. I'm like really passionate about that bit.
Yeah, this is true, because as a young children, women, I'm talking about specifically, when our bodies go through those changes, certain standards are put on us, aren't they? It's a bad thing sometimes in certain perspectives, but it's not, is it? When you start when you go through puberty and you start developing in that way, there are so many things put on us women that are not right.
Yeah. This is really, gosh, I can get quite emotional around that, because even now, so yes, I've been holding red tents and moon circles, for example, for women, where we gather around the time of the moon. And that was also part of my priestess training, was to be able to hold and facilitate circles like that and rituals for those kinds of life stage transition points for women. And every circle that I've sat in or held space for, at first I started doing it and I thought, well, I'm in my 50s, so probably this doesn't happen anymore, does it? But no, still young women in their 20s would be talking about how ashamed they felt at the time of their first bleeding and how nobody had told them what to expect. And my heart just feels so heavy and sad, because actually that is the time when a woman is beginning to connect for the very first time with a key opportunity for her empowerment and her awakening, is when she begins to bleed. It's her entry point into her womanhood. It's a crucial time for opening and self-connection. Her sexual energy begins to wake up, her body blooms and blossoms. And if that transition moment is regarded with the respect and the honor and the celebration that it deserves, she will transition in a completely different way into her womanhood than if she is surrounded by shame and fear and misinformation about something being dirty or wrong or shameful. My goodness, that bleeding, that blood is sacred, that blood is powerful. There's all kinds of rituals that women can do with their menstrual blood, for example. But I also want to say it's never too late. Like I can perhaps, if there are women listening who are older, who are bleeding, or even in their menopause, and you didn't have a very pleasant experience of menarche, which is what that time is called, you can always revisit it in a sacred space with a priestess like me or somebody, which is what I did in my priestess training. We all went through a ritual of the menarche time. We made a wreath of flowers for our hair, and we went through this beautiful ceremony, and we sang to each other, and we were sobbing our hearts out because of the wounds just around that one thing. Yeah,
it goes quite deep within our own mental psyche, doesn't it, of how we are to be perceived in today's society as women.
Yeah.
I want to sort of go down the lines really of how body image and how our development at that age is almost like a shameful thing, whether, not shameful, but it's judged even by other girls at that age. They're all very judgmental on each other. You've got too big, or you're too small breasted, or you started your periods too early, or you're too late, or, you should be doing this with somebody at this point, actually is the social pressures and peer pressures from not just men but other girls at that stage is very strong. I read a blog that you wrote about your own daughter, who's 15?
She's just turned 15.
Yeah, and some of the things she's gone through. Now, you have done an amazing job, because she is very aware of herself, isn't she? And I say self with a big capital S. Yeah, a big capital S on that. And we're not talking about just herself. We're talking about self, which is an amazing thing, and an amazing tool that you've been able to instill in her. So what can people do, other mothers do with their daughters, that can help instill this for them?
Right. Brilliant question. Again, love to answer this. And I just want to say, with regard to my daughter, she's awesome. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. And I do take some credit, but also I do also believe that my children chose me, and, you know, we're kind of like a soul group, the three of us, me and my two kids. I've got a son and a daughter, and they're both amazing. And so she came with that feistiness. She came through with that already. But yeah, and also I want to say I'm noticing, because my kids are in mainstream education, that it's getting harder and harder for them both to resist the pressures, even though they've had a sort of a very liberal and different approach from me to you know, who they are as souls and beings. But here's what I've done, and what I, you know, and I know again this might go against the grain for some people, but children are really sensitive. They'll pick up on anything that you are feeling and emitting. Even if you think you're hiding something from them, they will pick up on it immediately. They're incredibly smart, and they're incredibly sensitive, and the younger generation more so. Mm-hmm. So be completely transparent in everything that you do. Treat them as beings with awareness, sensitivity and intelligence from the very beginning. I've always spoken to my kids with respect and intelligence from the beginning, and given them age-appropriate information about anything. And also I've modelled no shame. There's no shame in this household around nudity or bodily functions. It's just a completely natural thing. We all still walk around naked, not the whole time, but, you know, there's no shame about the body. And I'm open about my emotions. I'm open about what's going on in my life. You know, not completely about everything, but I'm open. So I'm modelling what I'm not. There's no disparity, I suppose. And what I think a lot of us experienced as children, I did certainly, was there was a huge conflict between what my parents told me and what they were modelling. So it's very confusing.
Okay. So how do you, when you've got those taught systems within ourselves from childhood, from your own childhood, and then you embrace something completely different, there is that inner battle, isn't there? It's a fear thing. It's like, oh God, it feels wrong, but it feels right as well. For you know, this, it's right for me, but I didn't grow up like this, and that felt right at the time, and now I'm a little confused. How do you get that balance within your own head between what it is?
I covered this in one of my workshops recently. I mean, I don't personally have any conflict around that, because I have absolute certainty in knowing about who I am and what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. Though my shadow still rises up, and I did a live stream about that today. So I want everyone to know that, you know, just like everyone, I have a shadow side too. And what I was talking about, the dark feminine, actually, and the self-doubter and the victim is part of my shadow dark feminine, and she makes herself known from time to time, everybody. But I suppose what helps is having the awareness of oneself, and that does take a bit of cultivating over time, the capacity to witness ourselves with honesty. And I also talked about this recently. For the longest time, I was scared to admit to anybody else what I thought was, in inverted commas, bad or naughty or dirty or wrong about me. And that's one of the biggest mistakes. Again, it's what we're inculcated with in society, is a fear of seeing what we think is wrong about us. There's nothing wrong with any of us. We've all got light and dark, and it's the sooner we embrace the dark, the better we are. But there are these tribal influences, and particularly around sexuality, and particularly around, you know, how we relate. But sooner or later, life is going to become so difficult, challenging, or painful for us that we're going to feel that pull to create life on our own terms, you know, because there will be too much dissonance that is uncomfortable and will express itself as feeling unhappy, feeling depressed, feeling stuck, you know, physical ailments. And we're going to have to make a change. And so then you just make a conscious choice, like, okay, so how do I want to define my life from here? What are my values? What are the tribal values? What are the values I've been conditioned with? So a lot of the things that we talked about just now in terms of the stuff that unfortunately is still happening in terms of how girls judge each other, and there's this social pressure. I am going to use the blanket term that I kind of almost see it as like this, I do see it like a darkness actually, the patriarchy, which is a way of thinking and that we have all been conditioned with, that keeps us disempowered and keeps us controlled. And the minute we begin to have a flicker of seeing what that is doing and step outside it, we can't be controlled anymore, or not so easily. And we are then able to claim back our power, because the true nature of women is to be sisters together and to support and nourish each other and to support and hold one another up. It is not to bitch and backbite and compare. That is what a kind of a less conscious form of masculinity actually does. It's not what the awakened feminine does. Awakened women are there for each other with love. There's no competition. We work together. There's harmony. And same with the sort of the focus on the physical body, and that sort of media cultivated stereotype of what beauty is. Again, that's just a myth to keep us disempowered and to keep us as consumers. Your power and your beauty and your radiance as a woman doesn't come from what you put on, how how perfect your boobs are. Mm-hmm. They're really not about that.
It's so true. Whether you wear makeup, whether you dye your hair, whether you dress in a certain way.
I'm not sort of saying don't do what makes you feel beautiful at all. So it's, like, do what makes you feel beautiful, but don't do it for anyone else or for any other reason, or to compare yourself, or to, it's otherwise you're constantly looking for validation from outside yourself. And what we all have to learn, especially women, is to find the validation within yourself.
Yeah, so you do it for you, not for anybody else.
Yes.
You don't care about what anybody else thinks. If it suits you, you go for it. Now, there has been a huge awakening in the female realms over the last, 10 years, I would say. Huge awakening. A lot more women are coming into their own power and embracing themselves in a way that they never have before. Men are lacking in this way, do you feel?
Men are lacking. Oh.
Or do you think, no, maybe that was the wrong word. Men are a step behind. They haven't had the same awakening level that the women have had recently.
I think there is a lag.
That's a better word.
I think there's a lag. And, there are all these wonderful quotes around about how Western woman is going to save the world, or if the change comes, it's going to be from the feminine. And, the balance, it's been out of balance for so long that the rebalancing needs to happen. So it's I'm kind of doing a sign with my hands. But of course, you can't see that of the scales. And I've kind of got the masculine scales higher up and the feminine scales lower down, but the feminine scales coming up to meet the masculine. But it's not just a case of that. It's beyond that. It's a rebalancing, but it's also a need to step into a completely new paradigm, because otherwise we are just coming back into the same duality, polarity. And actually we want to move above and beyond that, really, men and women, and then also masculine and feminine, because we all have masculine and feminine within us. Mm-hmm. So, as women on the awakening path, what I'm teaching is that we resolve that wounding of the masculine mm-hmm. within ourselves. And then as we do that, and what I'm going to say is, as we heal that within ourselves and recreate that relationship within ourselves, so it begins to change on the outer. So we can take the initiative and we can lead the way in that, and stop playing the games that we've been playing, because we have been playing. It's easy to kind of point the finger at men and make them the ones to blame, but it's not really about that. It's been the patriarchal paradigm has not really benefited men either. Look at the suicide rate of men.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really high. So I feel a lot of compassion for that. And yes, there does need to be a change and a shift in awareness too. I've lost my track. Completely lost my track.
No, that's okay, because it's quite a big discussion topic in regards to the up and coming masculine awakening, because my perspective on this particular issue would be that there are this much problems within the masculine field because they're not being able to embrace their awakening in a way that women are encouraged to embrace their awakening. There are a lot more women that are attending workshops and looking for something that comes from within rather than... and society has put them in this kind of world because relationships break down a lot more, so they're having to rely on themselves a lot more. And I don't think men are being given the tools, whereas girls will sit and chat and boost, your own girly circles will do that and say, well, what do you fancy doing? And give it a go. Whereas men are like, oh, get on with it, mate. Suck it up. It's a different way of dealing with it. Whereas they're not going, well, if you fancy going and sitting in a meditation circle, off you go and do it. Whereas your girly mates will be like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's do yoga. Let's do, let try it, see what happens. And I think that men aren't being given the tools necessarily, unless they have female friends, which again is changing. It used to be very much boys on one side of the disco, girls on the other, and the men would approach the women, whereas you're seeing a lot more male-female friendships, not anything to do with a sexual connection, but just a friendship developing now, which never used to happen. It used to be men stuck to the men crowds and the men sports and stuff like that, and women got together and did the sandwiches and the tea in the tent. And I know that's very very stereotypical, but it's demonstrating a point is where I'm going with that. Whereas I think because there's these friendships now between males and females, they are starting to get that encouragement to embrace themselves in a way that they've probably not been able to embrace before. Like, well, come along to my yoga class with me, or come along to my meditation class with me. See how you feel. It pushes your comfort zones, and men are now starting. It's a very, very tentative start, I feel, but it is slowly starting, and it is being born out of these issues, like we've talked about mental health, like men's mental health, suicide rates and stuff like that. They need this as much as the women needed this 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think what we also have to acknowledge is that we are different. And I know this might not go down well with some people, but, I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about political correctness. And for me, it's really important to state that if you're born into a woman's body with a vagina and breasts, you are going to experience life differently to a man who is born with a penis and no breasts and no vagina. Your physical interaction with life will be different, and there are, even if they're minimal, physiological and biological and psychological differences, yes, even though we're on a spectrum. So I do believe in that. And at the same time, what I notice, and I'm not an expert in working with masculinity, I want to say a couple of things. I do have some amazing men, friends, and men that I know who are working with the masculine and have been doing for years. And it's a little bit more hidden. It's a little bit more in the background, but there are men's circles now that have been running for quite some time, and that is a growing movement. Excellent. There's a friend of mine, for example, he's got a wonderful name, Kenny Marmarella de Cruz, and wow. He is, I know, get that name, baby. He's an amazing guy, and he runs really successful men's circles. There's another man who is a friend of mine I'm going to be doing a workshop with, actually, Nick Clements, and he wrote a book ages ago now, actually, called The Alpha Wolf, all about this whole having to be the alpha wolf, and actually a man discovering a deeper nature. So men need to connect with their feminine. It does not mean if they connect with their feminine, they will become feminized, but it does mean for them there is a need to connect with their emotional and sexual selves in a more integrated way. But I think it can be very confusing at the moment. There can be probably for the masculine out there can be a lot of fear because of the Me Too movement and not really knowing what to do. and probably a little bit of resentment and fear of losing power and fear of things changing, because the feminine energy is very powerful, and unless you're a man who is strong in your own masculine, you might be threatened by that. And also, of course, a sort of a traditional way of masculine has been not being able to admit vulnerability, and that's what underpins a lot of the suicide stuff. Men have been conditioned to not show their vulnerability, even though they are vulnerable too.
Yeah.
And then there has been, perhaps on some extremes of the feminine, a vitriolic shadow expression of man bashing, and that can kind of create a dynamic where a man might be then resistant to, going towards the growth path. I've got a friend who's a yoga teacher, a man, and he says whenever a man comes into his class, he shakes his hand because there are so few men.
But we kind of want these men to become empowered within themselves, don't we? You get an empowered man and an empowered woman together. That's a force to be reckoned with, isn't it? Yeah, it's funny, I found one.
Where did you see him?
Well, it was fleeting glimpse, But it's a force to be reckoned with when you get these two, like this balance between the empowerment of the masculine and feminine. So if you can embody that in the physical sense of a male and a female, how amazing would that be?
Amazing, yeah. Still a pretty rare thing at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
Still pretty rare, but I will come back to us. All we can do as women is to do the work, stop playing the games that we've been playing, which has been playing the victim, using our sexuality to manipulate, trading with our sexuality. So we've got to stop playing those games. We've got to stop mothering men, which is another shadow behavior which alienates men as well. So all of those patterns that we can go into, and what other shadow behaviors like looking for the rescuer, looking for the hero, the knight in shining armor. I know I've done that one quite a few times myself.
Hands up, same here.
Not taking responsibility for our own sexuality and for our own sexual pleasure, being willing to say no, stop, I don't like that, touch me this way. So taking responsibility for your pleasure and not making him responsible for it, because if he doesn't, so most men don't know how to pleasure women, but then most women don't know what gives them pleasure. So you've got to find out and then teach your partner and stop blaming him for being a bad lover. Take responsibility and wake up your own sexuality and have a good time, and then share what you've discovered.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. It's not a one-way pleasure street. It's a two-way pleasure street, that particular topic. I get a little uncomfortable with that, talking about it on air. I'm not going to lie about that one.
Okay.
That's a personal thing. Anyway, there is an experience you had that I would like to discuss with you, because it's quite a controversial one.
Oh, what is it?
You went on a retreat recently. Oh, I say recently. You've been on a retreat, and it was in Greece. And you did a meditation where you were blindfolded. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me about that, please?
Yeah. Why did you say... All right, anyway. Yeah, it was a beautiful workshop that I was in, which was all about... I can't remember the title of the workshop now, but it was something like conscious loving in community or something like that. It was very simple exercise. So we were partnered up with somebody in the group. We were blindfolded, or we had our eyes closed, and we had been meditating before that to just kind of open the body, to become more receptive, basically. Because when we are in our normal state of being, we're probably not that receptive or sensitive. And then if we meditate and just settle into our body, our energy field opens and we become more aware and conscious and sensitive. So we'd meditated, and then we went out into the garden, and our partner had instructions to we were to walk wherever we felt like walking. They were just to make sure that we were safe and not going to knock into anything. But then also they could stop us at any point and direct our hands to certain things. And they could also tilt our head in a certain direction and then whisper into our ear, open your eyes and look into your mirror. Mm-hmm. And so I had a really lovely partner. He was such a lovely man. He was so tender and sweet. I loved him. It was gorgeous. Not in a fancy way, just a lovely man.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was just amazing to feel the texture of things. With my fingertips became really, really super sensitive. So, you know, I was just feeling the canvas of a hammock or the bark of a tree, the scent of a flower. And then at one point he just stopped me and sort of tilted my head up a bit and whispered in my ear, open your eyes and look into your mirror. And I opened my eyes and I looked up and I was looking at the tree. It was a tree and the leaves were like there in front of me. And I was just overwhelmed with love. Mm-hmm. And this tree was beaming love at me, and I had such an overwhelming knowing in that moment that nature is love, and that this energy of love is being emitted by nature all the time, that I'm surrounded by love and I've just been cut off to it most of my life. And this is what is around us all the time. Nature is loving us all the time. And of course I see nature as an expression of the divine feminine energy. Mm-hmm. You know, is the Shakti energy alive in nature? Just love, 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 love. It's a profound moment, and it's really important to share that, because we live, like, well, I live in London, and the more we cut off from that connection with what life truly is, the easier it is to be disconnected from ourselves and the planet and one another. Mm-hmm. And then we do things to one another and ourselves and the planet that are harmful and destructive, because we've stopped feeling and knowing that. But actually that aliveness and that love and that essence is there all the time.
Yeah, we talk about this quite a lot, don't we? Get out in nature. If you're feeling disconnected, get out in nature. And this, it demonstrates that point exactly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Reconnect. Reconnect with it. And even if you live in a city, there are parks, and even if there's just like a tree in a square or something, you know what I mean? You can connect just by looking up at the canopy. Absolutely.
And connection with nature is so fundamental for everyone, for mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being. I mean, I think it's even been proven, but I'm not one to go and quote figures in that way. I just know it. It's like we just know that. And for anyone wanting to connect with their feminine, it's another important way of doing so. You know, like I said, I think I also wrote this in one of my blogs. One of the practices that we started off with in my Priestess training was literally, you know, in Tantra, we have a practice called eye gazing, where you sit opposite somebody and you gaze with a soft gaze, open-eyed, and sort of begin to connect with the soul. And our practice as priestesses was to go and eye gaze with trees and connect with the essence and the energy and the soul of trees, and begin to realize that the goddess is alive everywhere. And, you know, particularly in nature. So it's not this far-fetched, airy-fairy, flouncing around in red dresses thing, although I do that too. You can connect with the goddess by when you do your gardening, you know, when you go for a walk in the park, when you breathe the fresh air, when you look at a flower. You know, looking at a flower can be orgasmic. It can be life-changing if we open ourselves.
Yeah, very much so. And if you're going through a very, very hard time, take that time to calm your mind and just look and breathe and live nature. Because believe you me, it's really good for the soul. It really helps settle the soul. I've done that myself at hard times. It's sometimes very cathartic to do that. The eye gazing is an incredibly potent, emotional connection with another human, isn't it? There's been there was an artist, I can't remember her name now, and she sat down and she had a minute with each person, and these people were just coming in off the street, and it was just looking into each other's eyes, and some people were sobbing by the end of the time with her, and it was just to watch it. I remember watching it thinking, this is just awesome. This is just connection on a level that most people don't do.
Yeah, it is profound and yet incredibly simple, right? And also, I know again from running workshops and stuff how difficult it is for most people to do. In every workshop where I do this sort of thing, if people aren't used to it, there will be giggles, there will be all kinds of ways of trying to avoid doing it. And in fact, I did something similar recently for a group of women that I was doing a workshop for. And what fascinated me was that these women had known each other since childhood, and yet they could not stand and look into each other's eyes for even 10 seconds without feeling uncomfortable and having to look away or laugh or something. And I was like, wow. So how deeply do you really know this person? I know it's confronting, but again, it's like a lot of us are living on the surface. And yes, when we're in our busy lives, there is a degree to which we do have to have boundaries and hold ourselves safely and not always be open to everything, of course. But sometimes we've become so cut off that we're forgetting to acknowledge that the person next to us on the tube is another soul, and the person that we are, for example, making hateful comments towards on Facebook is another soul. And eye gazing is a very quick and easy way of dropping the mask, all those layers of ego and identification with various things that we think we are, and beginning to see, I'm not that, and actually those eyes looking back at me are the same. We're the same. It's actually me. It's me looking at me. You can begin to have an understanding of that, and which is why it makes people cry, because it's very profound to be seen.
It makes you feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think that's why people avoid it, because you see the vulnerability and the, the emotion within that soul that you're looking into those eyes of, and like you say, it's incredibly profound.
Yeah.
Now, some of the other profound things you've been doing recently, you've been doing a goddess workshop. Honestly, I could talk to this lady all night. I'm trying to cram it all in. You've been doing goddess workshops, haven't you? And what you're doing is connecting with individual goddess entities at these workshops. And some of those have been very profound experiences for you, for your group, actually, haven't they?
They have, in a way that has surprised even me. So, I've been doing this practice called Dancing the Goddess for several years now. So it's kind of, as my dance teaching and various things developed, I then created this thing myself and it was when I was doing my Priestess training that the impulse to do this came, and it was a very strong impulse, like, you have to do this. It's called Dancing the Goddess and you're going to do it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I've done it in various different forms, and it keeps evolving. And then last term, the series of workshops that we did, I was like, right, we're going to connect him with the different goddesses from Tantra Yoga tradition. And so each week we dance with a different goddess. We created an altar to this goddess and had the intention of creating a sacred space. So there was a seriousness to it, because it was literally, we are creating a sacred space. We're going to invoke this goddess. The lovely lady Nikki, who was supporting me, we would Reiki the space so it was clear, and we would dress in the color of the goddess. We would bring objects to put on the altar as a way of honoring that goddess, and then I would guide the group in connecting in through mantra and movement and other ways, and also sort of sharing about the energy. Me and everyone away was the extent to which the energy of each goddess made itself felt palpably in our bodies, in the room, and then in our lives. Like actually, so for example, just to give you a concrete example, you know, everyone knows about, well, maybe a lot of people will know about Kali, who is a very strong, oh, my cushion just fell over when I said that. She's a really strong, fierce goddess of birth, life, death, cutting through illusion, ego death, change of a radical nature. And I have worked with her, and she's bloody powerful, not to be messed with. Now, when we danced with Kali, the lady who was one of the ladies in the group had been in a job that she really was finding very unfulfilling and difficult. And I think it was that night she decided to give in her notice. She handed in her notice and has transitioned out of that field of work entirely into something much more in alignment with her soul's calling that she'd been afraid to do, and she just did it. That was like but there are so many examples. You know, when we danced with Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance, the joy and effervescence in that room, it was like it was filled with pink golden light. It was incredible, really incredible. So these energies are real and powerful, and when we have, it's about the intention. If we have the intention, she will show herself to us. So it's kind of bring reverence and bring intention and explore.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was one particular goddess, wasn't there, that you didn't connect particularly well with?
Can you remind me which one it was?
Was it Seti?
Who?
Seti? Was it Seti?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to find it now.
I know.
She very very passive and.
Oh yeah. Oh, hang on. My mind's gone completely blank. Sita.
Sita. That's it. I was nearly there, everybody.
I was like, who didn't like it? Yes. Oh, but this is the great thing. So each of the goddesses every week, you know, different women in the room would feel an affinity with different energies, obviously. So for some, they love the warrior goddesses. For others, they love the sensual goddesses. For others, they love the playful ones. You know, so, and of course, that was teaching us about ourselves, because that's another part of what this communion with the goddess does. It shows you, where am I light? Where am I dark? Where am I in resistance? What triggers me? It teaches you about yourself. And Sita, I was like, you know, she's so bloody passive, isn't she? She's just, and the way he treated her, it was just awful. And it was just reminded me of the whole patriarchal story, and I really couldn't get down with it. And I think particularly because I had experienced an abusive relationship a couple of years before, and so I still felt quite triggered by that submissiveness in her.
And what did you learn from that? I love this about when you start working in whatever way it is with the gods and goddesses. They always teach you something, don't they? And you learned something from this, which is why I brought it up.
What did I learn? I can't remember.
Oh my goodness.
I can't remember now. I've gone completely blank. I know that it sort of flipped around in some way, but I can't remember how it did.
You realise how strong she must have been.
Oh, that's it. How do you know? Are you psychically reading me?
I wish I could say that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly it. It sort of flipped at some point from seeing her as weak and submissive to seeing her as incredibly strong, and how it's like in being submissive, she was the stronger one, but she wasn't really submissive. She had her own dignity. She always had her dignity.
So no matter what adversity this poor woman was put under, all the challenges that were set her, she still maintained her sense of self and stayed true to herself through all of that, didn't she?
That's it, yeah. So that was a revelation, because I didn't go in there expecting to know that. Yeah, it was a revelation. So you see, you know, you never know what's going to happen. You cannot know. And that's why these things can't be understood intellectually. You have to go in and open yourself and have an experience and come out the other side and go, whoa, I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah. And it's those times where actually they have the most impact on you, because it's resonated deep within yourself, and you again, it's another little awakening within you, isn't it? You face that yourself, your own boundaries and blockages, I suppose, from past experiences of your own, and you go, no, there's no way I'd put up with that.
Yeah.
But actually, how she dealt with that was pretty awesome, considering he was an absolute horrible person.
I keep wanting to swear. I'm a bit of a swearer. I'm trying to stop myself from swearing on your radio show.
Don't worry, I do it all the time. They pop out sometimes. I can't help myself. Now, before we, because we're running out of time, believe it or not, you've written 3 books, haven't you?
I have not written 3 books. I don't know. No, I don't know who told you that.
Oh, I looked on your website. It said you've got The Gift, Awakening, Shakti and Rapture.
Oh, okay. Yes, they are in writing. Well, I have written the first one, but they haven't been published to buy yet.
Oh, right. Okay, so they're to come.
They're to come. So the first one's been written, and that's Rapture, which is the story of my sexual and spiritual awakening. It's being reviewed by some people at the moment, and I'm actually not sure if I'm going to publish it, because it's really perhaps a little bit too out there. Is what I've come to realise. However, it's what I'm going to probably do, because it's very, very revelatory. It sort of goes into the deepest, darkest revelations of my sexual and spiritual awakening. No holds barred, and I've kind of almost, as I wrote it, it was sort of a catharsis in a way, and a healing and a learning. And what came out of that was I began to, sort of the next 2 have come out of that. So I began to see that in all these experiences of pain that I'd had, and for me, most of my experiences of pain have been through relationship. For other people, it would be something else, but that's just because that's been my path. I began to see how everything that I thought was painful and horrible and a fucking punishment was actually a blessing and a gift. So that was kind of, at some point, I had this aha moment, and it was like, oh my God, all the things that I thought were the worst and most horrible were the biggest gifts. And so it flipped my whole perspective, I suppose, from being a victim to recognizing the divine plan to my life, way beyond what I could have orchestrated, to bring me the lessons and bring me the shifts in awareness that I need to go to the next stage of my own journey. So that's what the gift is all about. And actually, I'm doing a workshop on that in November in the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival in Birmingham. And then the Awakening Shakti is the whole sort of 9-stage process of awakening for women. And what I'm going to do is take some of the stories from my Rapture book, the personal story, and put them into that and use them to illustrate what I'm going to be talking about, what I talk about in there, which is sort of the 9 steps of awakening. And that will feed in with the online program that I'm going to be launching soon, Awakening Shakti, which is for women who really want to dive into this journey and go on quite a deep path of transformation over a period of time. So it's 9 months. It's a 9-month commitment of journeying through 9 different aspects of your awakening path. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, where can people find you, Shakti, if they want to read more blogs like I've done today? And trust me, you'll be thoroughly interested in those. And find out more about you. Where can they find you?
So my website is Shakti, and it's Sundari, or Sundari, Sundari.com. So ShaktiSundari.com, all one word. I'm on Facebook as well, and I'm on Instagram. So any of those places. And I've got a lovely little group on Facebook, which is the Awakening Shakti group. It's a closed group, but any women who are interested in what I do, you can request to join. And so I'm always doing live streams and posting little snippets in there. And I have a YouTube channel as well, which has got loads of really good interviews on it with some amazing people. So, yeah, you can look me up on YouTube as well.
Brilliant. Don't forget, when you go over there, click like, share and subscribe.
Oh, thank you. I never say that. I'm so bad at marketing.
I do it all the time for Parasearch. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for being so candid as well. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Kerry. You've asked the most brilliant questions. I've loved every minute. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Don't forget, everybody, Parasearch Radio is on 5 nights of the week, covering all kinds of topics for you. We are on Parasearch Radio on Facebook. Tomorrow I will be going live on the page for your weekly roundup of shows. It's going to be a bit later because I've got a day job, unfortunately, and it's going to be a bit later because I've got to go do more things now because I got promoted. Yay! So it's going to be around 6:30. So tune in tomorrow night on that show. Don't forget, we are on YouTube ourselves, and I'm going to do it. Click like, share and subscribe on the Parasearch Radio group page. We have a competition that will be drawn on the live feed tomorrow evening. If you want to be part of it and want to win that rosary that I made, then you need to go over, be a liker of the Parasearch Radio group page, and then just enter your name and say that gets drawn tomorrow evening. On that note, thank you once again, Shakti. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I bid you all a very farewell.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.